Hi everyone, and welcome to my summer reading wrap-up. It is officially September and I've been seeing a ton of YouTube videos that are fall themed, but here we've been having 90-degree temperatures, so unfortunately sweaters and PSLs are out of the question. Anyway, let's get on to the books. First, I read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. This is a coming-of-age story set in early 20th century New York City, specifically the borough of Brooklyn. It follows a girl named Francie as she grows up in poverty along with her mother, father, and little brother. Although they rent a small apartment and basically live paycheck to paycheck, they're very individualistic and proud, especially the women. They dream of owning a house and having a better future, and Francie in particular has a passion for writing and one day wants to become an author. I like this book, especially how it presents the theme of self-reliance through the characters. And there was one passage specifically which describes Francie's mother and father, which I found really good. Katie had a fierce desire for survival, which made her a fighter. Johnny had a hankering after immortality, which made him a useless dreamer. And that was the great difference between these two who loved each other so well. This description rings true because we often meet people like this in real life, the survivors and the dreamers. Although I like this book, there are various things about it that just did not work for me. For example, the tree from the book's title is supposed to represent survival despite great difficulty. And the way that it's linked to Francie and her family was just way too literal and on the nose for me. Another thing that I didn't care for was how many of the events in the book just felt very ordinary. I think this is because the novel is semi-autobiographical. If you read a little bit about Betty Smith's life, you can see that there are obvious parallels between her life and the novel. And I'm not saying that Betty Smith's life was boring by any means. It's just that, most of our lives don't have interesting things happening constantly. I'm not a big reader of biographies for that very same reason. A person has to be really extraordinary for me to read about, them growing up, going to school, going through puberty, because none of those things in themselves are extraordinary. Here, something has been lost in the attempt to show realism, and although I liked this book, there's just not enough there to elevate it to something really special. But I think anyone who really likes coming-of-age stories would enjoy this. Next is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. This is a classic adventure story, first published in 1864. It follows an eccentric professor, his nephew, and their guide into an Icelandic volcano and further into the depths of the earth, although I don't think they actually ever made it to the center. I think this book was the first to introduce the concept of a prehistoric ecosystem existing in modern times, although I just read that from Wikipedia, so I'm not certain how true that is. Unfortunately, I did not care for this book. The beginning was really drawn out and the language was noticeably dated. I'm also not sure how well the scientific descriptions hold up to modern day science. I listened to this on audiobook, but I think the best format for it would have been a picture book where all of the geological processes and terms were shown in photographs or illustrations. That would have made the book come to life a little bit more. As is just a little bit too difficult to get into. Next is a collection of short stories by H.G. Wells, each dealing with a fantastical topic. Of the set, my favorite by far is The Country of the Blind, in which a mountaineer takes a tumble and ends up in a hidden valley. The valley is home to villagers who are completely blind. So this mountaineer immediately thinks that he's going to be their king because he can see but they cannot. And the story kind of unravels the way in which his assumption is very much wrong. This story was so short but so good. All of the little details about how the villagers interact with their visitor, their daily habits, what they think about being blind are just so fascinating, and the pacing and the ending are just perfect. Unfortunately, I think H.G. Wells changed the ending in a later edition and it just doesn't sound as good. But anyway, I really love this story in its original form and I highly recommend it. The other stories in the collection I didn't enjoy as much. Some were still fun, like there was one about an explorer who finds and hatches a dinosaur egg. But others, like there's one story about a guy who gets angry at his wife, eats a magical purple mushroom, goes crazy, and somehow his marriage is fixed in the process. It's just so bad. So overall, this collection is kind of a mixed bag, but I'm happy that I read it just because I found The Country of the Blind. Speaking of strange fiction, I also read Welcome to Nightvale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. Years ago, the authors were working boring corporate jobs, and they decided to start a podcast called Welcome to Nightvale on the side. They put so much passion into it that it eventually became their full-time job. Now they do live shows, they sell merchandise, and publish books like this one in addition to their podcast. And I think that there's something really admirable about that. Unfortunately, I just did not like this book at all. And it's disappointing because the premise is so interesting. You know, imagine a cute, homey American town where reality doesn't function normally. Time seems to loop, rewind, or stand still, and weird bubbles of light show up on the horizon at night. To add to this, the town's inhabitants are under constant surveillance by their mysterious government, which outlaws things like owning pens or going to the dog park. Throughout the book, mundane things are made fantastical and more often than not threatening. For example, the librarians at the town's library are vicious monsters who will try to kill you if you check out a book. And vice versa, fantastical things are made mundane. For example, an angel will get into your car and hitch a ride to the town hall. I'm describing it now and it sounds so intriguing, but the way that it's executed in the book is so boring. It just feels like absurdism for the sake of absurdism, with weirdness forced into every situation in an attempt to make you laugh, which I just did not, or at least not very much. So overall, I can't say I recommend this book. On a more positive note, I reread Ubik by Phillip K. Dick, specifically because so many of the themes from Nightvale reminded me of this. But Ubik is an example of how to do things right. The story follows Joe Chip, who works at a prudence organization. Prudence organizations are futuristic companies that help protect their clients from intrusions by people who have psychic powers. I'm not going to get into the plot. This book is only about 200 pages long, so it's more of a novella, and I really recommend that you just give yourself the pleasure of reading it and being surprised by it. It has tension, mystery, this hallucinogenic, reality bending element that, is so hard to do, I think. Here, the mystery is organic, there's a logic behind it, and it's so much more intelligent than just, throwing quirky things into the narrative just to throw the reader off balance. I have to say that this is one of my favorite books, and I'm really glad that I reread it. So, if reality bending sci fi sounds at all up your alley, I highly recommend this. So, that's it for my end of summer reads. I hope you enjoy them, and I'll see you soon.